Hey, everybody. As recruiters, we all know that hiring can be one of the most challenging parts of running a business. Whether you're a startup looking to build a dream team or a well-established company aiming to streamline your recruitment process, the right tools can make all the difference. Teamtailor is a powerful, all-in-one recruitment software your candidates and team will love. It's not just a piece of software, but a way of working. With Teamtailor, you get everything you need all in one place. Powerful analytics, an AI assistant, customizable workflows, powerful integrations, and so much more. Plus, Teamtailor is easy to use and implement with their intuitive, user-friendly interface. If you're focused on the candidate experience, CX is at the heart of the ATS. Just ask any of the 4 million candidates who connect with customers every month. Join the ranks of over 150,000 recruiters and more than 8,500 companies like Oatly, Porsche, and OneFlow who have transformed their recruitment with Teamtailor. Discover the new way to attract and hire top talent and see the results for yourself. Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the Rebel TA podcast. I'm really excited to have an awesome conversation today with Matt Alder. If you work in talent acquisition and you don't know Matt, that's probably a good starting point. He's a man that needs no introduction, so I'm not going to give one. What's up, Matt?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm really good. It's always good to be on someone else's podcast, answering the questions rather than asking them.
100%. Where are you based and what are you working on?
So I'm based just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. And I'm mainly working on the Recruiting Future podcast, which is what I do. So, I have a podcast about the future of HR and TA, publishes twice a week. Enjoy everything to do with podcasting, and also really looking into what the future of TA is going to be like. It's an impossible task, but it's a fun thing to work on.
Breaking the wall down, two bros with a podcast talking shop about TA, future of work. I think the fact that you just said it's an impossible task to predict the future of work is the fun in all of it. So today I'm excited to chat just a little bit as we head into 2025 about what you're seeing, what you're passionate about. You talk to a lot of folks across various industries, sectors, roles, whether they're recruiters, analysts, consultants. Let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's going to be a very interesting year. I mean, you could say it's been a very interesting year for at least the last 5 years, but I think 2025 is going to be a year where things really start to happen. So particularly with AI, how long did we go before we said AI? Was it less than a minute? 2 minutes?
We are 1 minute and 57 seconds in.
Yeah, we are less than 2 minutes. That's good. Particularly with AI, obviously the last 18 months we've seen some incredible things, some incredible opportunities. Really in the last few months, I think we've seen the established big tech providers launching some pretty interesting offerings. And I think that 2025 is the year where we get some kind of serious traction with this, with all of the consequences that might bring in terms of how TA might change. At the same time, we've still got a load of complications and difficulties and kind of negative forces driving things. So global economy, political upheaval, all those kind of things. It kind of makes for an interesting, disruptive year. But I hope one that is positive in terms of TA going in the right direction and just making recruiting better for everyone.
And I think that's why we've seen a lot of recruiting move more towards talent management and figure out ways to bring in more post-hire insights to the recruiting function. Obviously, recruiters work in recs, their workflows, their productivity are empowered by AI. Hiring always has peaks and valleys based on the market. So that's nothing new. The velocity in which recruiters operate is, tenacity out the gate. I know all my recruiter friends are hustlers, but it's that piece of being more strategic. Are you seeing that kind of trend moving more towards analytics, insights, intelligence, and talent management so recruiters can stay relevant?
Yeah, I think the potential is absolutely there. And I'm seeing it in some cases, but not really across the board. I think that it's very difficult when you're recruiting, all the time, which is to some extent is a short-term kind of activity because you're trying to fill those roles and all those kind of things. And I think it can be quite difficult sometimes to, get above that parapet and be be strategic. And I think that perhaps the way that, TA teams are seen by employers is still in a very sort of transactional kind of way. And I think we saw that last year with so many people being laid off. So the potential is absolutely there. And I think I'm seeing it with, quite a few of the employers who come on my podcast. But by very nature, these are the people at the sort of the cutting edge, the people who are doing things differently. So I think there's still a long way to go. And my fear is that unless talent acquisition has the opportunity to kind of step up and drive this and, kind of get out of the day-to-day and really move things forward, it may happen to talent acquisition from, elsewhere in the business where there isn't the chance to set the agenda. There isn't necessarily the knowledge of what makes good hiring and all those kind of things. So it's kind of an interesting year from that perspective. The opportunity is absolutely there. The tools to use the data is there. AI makes a massive difference in this in terms of really shortcutting things that might have taken years to set up in the past. But it's just the ability to take that opportunity and the ability to shape the future, I think, is the question mark for me. And I would hope that, we would see, we would see some really sort of positive moves there.
And shaping the future comes down to the technology and the tools and the systems and how they relate to the workflows that we deploy on a daily basis. I appreciate you called out the transactional nature of recruiting. This is something that I've heard a lot of recruiters talk about, becoming more strategic. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with recognizing recruiting as being like just a pretty transactional relationship between ourselves and the business. And perhaps there's a space for this new wave of hiring and how we're bringing on folks through different employment engagements, whether it's part-time, fractional, augmented staffing. I think we're going to have to get creative, but it's also an ethical and sustainable way forward to say, like, do we actually need like a full-time person with benefits and taxes and tools and systems in-house to fill some roles where in 18 months we may have to lay them off? Like, that humility, recruiters and recruiting leaders need to see around that corner and recognize that, like, okay, we've been through these ups and downs and layoffs. No one has a crystal ball. So how do we get creative around staffing teams as we go into 2025?
Yeah, I think that's critical. I've written a couple of books about talent. And in the first one, which I co-authored about 5 or 6 years ago, we talked about something called total talent thinking, which is kind of essentially this. And if your business isn't already doing this, then there is a huge opportunity for TA to drive this, I think. And it's exactly that. It's looking at, what are the company's objectives? What are we trying to do? What tasks do we need? What tasks do we need to be done? What skills do we need in the business? And then having a kind of a really strategic look about how that works is like, do we need a full-time person? Do we need to have better, reskilling and development for people who are already here? Do we need to be more mobile with people who are already here? Do we get someone on a fractional basis? Do we get someone on a gig basis? Do we get someone on a contract basis? Do we borrow an AI to come and do this particular thing, which I think is another, that might be something that we talk about quite a lot later in the year. And I think it's kind of taking that step back and looking at that in terms of the best way to do things, which is the kind of the real key to this, because it is thinking about talent and skills differently. And as you say, I think that's something that recruiters can play a big part in if it isn't, already kind of embedded in their organization.
I think recruiters are going to be more pragmatic and discerning in just how we communicate in the near future. To me, that's critical. When you talk about hiring teams with augmented and creative ways to bring them on, let's talk about this one phrase that we've all heard a million times. It's companies that love to say they hire, develop, and retain the best talent out there. That's a lie. Like, the best talent, it probably isn't going to go work at your company for, whatever full-time salary. They're not going to spend 3 or 4 years there. If they're truly the best, you might be able to say, like, hey, Matt, I need you to help me build this project. We're willing to pay you a premium. Do you have a 6 to 12-week window to help us out? That's the best talent, potentially. This lie is reminiscent of back when tech companies said they were like changing the world. Every company was like, no, we're not a SaaS product. We're changing the world. And that was a way to like shirk around regulation, trick around investor expectations. And the biggest lie that I'm seeing front and center on the billboards now is that AI is going to free humans to be more creative and give us time back. That is absolutely a lie. Like, our time is not going to be maximized by AI. What we're going to see in the future of work is this competition between AI productivity and human productivity. And we're already seeing in the marketing of AI, particularly agents to be deployed into companies, is that they don't get tired. They don't harass other employees, so there's low risk. They can deliver exponential results while other people are sleeping. They work around the clock. So the only way we're going to compete with that is like humans are going to have to deliver excellence against it. So I think we have these like business tropes. And in 2025, it comes down to just like being more pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. You kind of covered quite a lot of things. I think that that last point certainly is. I think that's really interesting because I think that over the last 2 years, it's been a very common thing to say that AI is going to be this co-pilot for recruiters. I've seen numerous people alluding to this kind of Iron Man, style thing where it's going to have all these tools and it'll be great and all this sort of stuff. And it became the norm. So I went to see, been to countless kind of events where people have stood up and talked about, these enhanced recruiters, these co-pilots, these kind of things like that. And it, as you say, it kind of misses some of the things that are quite obvious if you take a step back. And I think what it is when people are sort of talking about AI, you kind of have a small group of people at both ends of the spectrum. So you have people who are predicting the end of recruiting as we know it tomorrow, next week. It's always in a short time, 20. And they've been doing that for about 2 years. And it kind of like, I see the point. However, I'm not quite sure we'll get there. And at the other end of the scale, you have people who are like, nothing's going to change. Don't buy this AI stuff. Absolute nonsense. I can tell when someone's using it to write a LinkedIn post, therefore it must be rubbish. And again, it's very few people. So what's I think happened is people have kind of gone for this middle ground, which is like, okay, this seems like a safe place to land. And I always say to people, it's like, what if we land further towards there is no more recruiting than the middle? And are we prepared for that? And have you really thought that through? And I think that's been the kind of the issue over the last couple of years, that we haven't actually thought about this in terms of some of the implications are. Because don't tell me that the same employer that was laying off TA people last year is not going to look at AI doing something more efficiently and go, do you know what, we need to pair this with a human just because that's kind of how it works. So yeah, I think there's a it's a tremendous amount of disruption coming with this. And I think we just need to have a more sensible conversation that isn't wishful thinking or based on trying to keep the status quo, and just say, what does recruiting look like in our organization? And what is that mix between AI and humans? I think if we don't sort of look at that as, again, someone else will, CEO, COO, whoever it is. And I think that I don't have the answer to that necessarily, because I do think it probably varies from organization to organization. However, it's definitely a conversation that we need to be having. And I think that AI can do more things than people can possibly imagine at the moment, but there are still some things it can't quite do very well. So, quick sort of parallel example: as a podcaster, it would be very useful if I could clone my voice. Just recording podcast intros and those kind of things would be very easy if I could just get a computer to do it. So I've been trying to do that for the last few weeks, and there's some great tools out there. And I've got one that is kind of scarily close to the way that I talk. And in short kind of bursts of text, you cannot tell the difference between it and me. In much longer form content, you absolutely can, because it misses something. It misses some kind of emotional content, context or energy or something like that. So I think that AI can do a huge amount of things in terms of talking to candidates and all that kind of stuff. But there are bits that it can't do, or it can't do at the moment. And I think, yeah, we just need to have a sensible conversation about what that actually looks like. Because, yeah, I think it's going to be one of the themes of the year, and I'm not sure people are quite expecting it.
I just appreciate that you called out being sensible. To me, at the end of the day, like there are a lot of ways to make a living. I've done things before recruiting. It's fun to get into our little echo chamber, particularly in our news feeds and our algorithms and the 10 or 15 people we engage with regularly. At the end of the day, we're still early adopters of AI. I know you've published some white papers on AI for recruiting. There are people that are learning about the chat GPT today, and they're logging in for the very first time, or they're doing their first query, their first search. So HR is far too vast to have like these one size fits all predictions. But I think it is an existential strain on the systems from a recruiting operations perspective. And you've talked a little bit about this in the context of applicants being able to mass apply. And this is going to cause like crazy headaches for recruiting operations and the applicant tracking system. And I've kind of coined this phrase, we're in the third wave of hiring, where it's more advanced tooling, all-in-one systems, human-centered design. But I think more than that, it's how AI changes the workflow of recruiting. And I think it has to be like built from the ground up. It's not like, hey, this 10 or 12-year-old ATS system is going to rebuild their software and workflow. I think it's truly just going to change how recruiters work a requisition. Can you talk a little bit more about your vision for recruiting operations against the context of mass applications?
Yeah, I think the mass application thing is really interesting. And I think that, there are lots of companies who are already experiencing this, particularly in things like college recruitment, early careers recruitment, those kind of things where, volumes of applicants are up 20, 25%, in some cases even more than that. So there's always a question about what drives change in talent acquisition. And, I know people get very frustrated sometimes because it seems that recruiting never changes, which is kind of another topic. I think there's some reasons, the reasons kind of why change is quite slow. Perhaps we can come back to that. But sometimes there are events that drive change. So the pandemic is a great example of something that happened that exacerbated this move towards video interviewing, which, it's funny. You see lots of stuff in the papers about like papers. How old am I? You see lots of stuff in the media about, I return to the office and this company's returning to the office and all this kind of stuff. There's not much about we're returning to face-to-face interviews. It seems that everyone kind of is accepting that video plays a role in this. So that kind of happened very, very quickly. And I think that the mass application from candidates using AI is actually probably the thing that's going to drive the change, because it kind of really illustrates that the recruiting process is kind of not really, it's kind of not really fit for the times that we live in. And that's probably been the case for a really long time. Word documents, resumes, poorly thought out interview processes, all this kind of stuff. It's something that we've lived with for, a long time as the norm. And I think this kind of really exposes it, because, you can try and put in tools that recognize if someone's used AI, but that's never gonna work. It's kind of a false arms race. And as someone said to me as well, if you're using AI to apply for a job, resume, application form, it's very short bits of text, and it's actually very difficult to see, whether you're using AI. Coming to that sort of long versus short AI voice thing there. So I think that people have to reflect, and as you say, build this back from the ground up. How do we assess people? How do people apply? What happens? And I think it's a fantastic opportunity to build what I've been calling recruiting nirvana, which is recruiting that works for everyone. You've got something that works for candidates. You've got something that works for hiring managers. You've got something that works brilliantly for recruiters. And ultimately, it means that, the best talent, but the best available talent, for those roles, gets those jobs. And I think it's totally possible now. And you're kind of I'm seeing pockets of it. So in some of the kind of the high volume frontline hiring, we're seeing kind of lots of AI automation that's making it much quicker, which is fantastic from a candidate experience perspective, but also from a employer perspective. They're able to get offers out to people quicker, to stop them going to their competitors and all that kind of stuff. And also I've been seeing other initiatives where we're now finally able to give candidates feedback at scale about why they didn't get a role and all those kind of things. So things that were literally impossible 2 or 3 years ago are now possible. And I just think that, and you add in that kind of force of companies looking for efficiency, candidates just breaking systems because they've got access to these tools as well. It's the perfect storm to reinvent everything. So I'm really positive and optimistic about this, maybe wrongly, because I just think it is such a great opportunity. But to take it, we can't sit here and hang on to the past for dear life, because it's just not relevant anymore.
Well, Matt, that's good. I'm a mindfulness practitioner, so hearing you say recruiting nirvana is a fun one, the pathway to get there. Sourcing. I am bullish on the future of sourcing and communicating directly with candidates through this increased volume of automation, top of funnel inbound applicants. I know a lot of companies right now are struggling with their recruiting systems to manage, 1,000 1,000 applications in a rec in a week. I'm still bullish that recruiters need to get out and shake hands. That can be the virtual handshake, these Zoom calls you mentioned, because what I believe is going to happen is before we get to this, call it like AI mature state where we live in harmony with these systems, we're going to have this really muddy, murky experience. And as humans, like flesh and blood, we are going to have some weird relationship and challenges socially that we're going to cling to what makes us feel human, which is connection with other people. And the proof I have there is our relationship to social media. We already tried this. It promised us connectivity. We got it, but we didn't get the socio-cultural benefits of that connection. And that's why I think we're going to see more folks when it comes to getting a job being candidate-led, leaning more into companies that approach them with that human element before we get to the state of just total acceptance of technology taking this thing over. And maybe that's like a human evolution piece. Maybe I've been reading too much fiction, but that's kind of my thought process on it. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think that the kind of it's like what is the absolute unique skill set of a good recruiter? And I think that's the thing to really think about. And I think that sadly I'm old enough to kind of remember this sort of stuff, but if you go back to 25 years, it was like, what made a good recruiter then before we had all this technology? And it was that connection, that engagement, that persuasion, all of those kind of skills. Now, you could replicate some of those with AI. You could do some of that with AI in certain roles, but not across the board. And I think that's the thing to really focus on, because if you take away all the other stuff, so we've had 50,000 people apply for this job, what do we do? It's like, it doesn't matter. We've got systems that deal with that. We're only going to be talking to the ones who are, the ones that we really want to talk to. It's kind of applying those skills again. And it's a question mark for me. Do we still have those skills as an industry? Anyone kind of over about 45 or who's been in the industry for a long time will claim that absolutely they do. But there are lots of people who've been working in this industry for 20 years who haven't had to do some of these kind of things. So I think that's the kind of the nuance of it. Everyone say, well, we're going back to old school recruiting is great, we're going to be great. But it's like, does everyone have those skills? In some cases,
No.
those skills have not been needed, or there hasn't been a way to apply them at scale. But I think that's the thing. I think the other thing as well is it's just how you think about human behavior in this context. So I'm really interested in things like behavioral science and experience design. So if you're designing an AI-driven recruitment process, what's the science behind that? How are you taking people on that kind of journey? How are you designing that? How are you doing things that are almost illogical to computers, but work from a behavioral science perspective?
Yes.
And I think that's part of it as well. Just that, just not letting the technology just run with this in the way that someone's designed it to, but actually being really intentional about how you, design that experience, with or without the kind of human part of this, which which is still important. So huge types of, there's so many conversations around this we're not having, which is kind of frustrating for me, because I think this is what we should be talking about, not whether AI is going to take your job. It's just like, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's changing. How do we design
Yes.
it? How do we design it to work and be brilliant with the tools that we have? It's as simple as that.
I agree. And going back to the skills gap, who is teaching these new waves of recruiters the skills? And will there be entry level pathways for folks to get into recruiting? Existentially, I think sadly, like we're not going to see a lot of RCs, recruiting coordinators. We're not going to see a lot of folks beginning their career in a recruiting role. There will be new emerging roles around technology and branding. But I think what's going to happen is because we don't have those early career roles in recruiting, teaching the skills and the human element and the art of recruitment, we're going to have to evolve. We've seen an over-index on the science of recruiting, but I'm glad that you point a note back to the art of it, which is more of that human-centered design, candidate journey mapping. To me, that's some of the fun stuff. And that's where decisions get made. Sometimes it's in the nuances of the candidate journey, communications that are picked up outside of systems-driven automation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think there's two bits to this. I mean, the first bit is, I think, a problem that you highlight with work in general. If we're replacing the kind of work that people would do at entry level with automation, where do the next kind of senior people come from? How do people get the skills that they need? So that, I think, is a question for lots and lots of industries. And again, I think it's something that should be, front and center in conversation. I think the other bit is, it's kind of stripping this back and saying, actually, what skills is it that you need to do this? Do you need to be, a 50-something recruiter with 30 years of experience? Or do you need to be someone who's just really smart at, user interface design or digital marketing, or, where the parallel skills are? So I think there's a bit about, rethinking about what are these skills, and actually who has them, and where could they come from, and what do we call this? So again, it's just about being open-minded about this kind of thing. And it's just like, and actually, are we going to, train people to have these skills, and what skills is it that we're going to train them to do? So it's, I think there's kind of a lot there. I think that entry level thing is something that, I would expect governments to be talking about, to be honest with you, but they're
for sure.
Not. It's so that's kind of a big time bomb issue that needs
it's going
to
to change the infrastructure.
discussed.
And I appreciate that you bring in how we talk about it at the government level, but also like how we talk about it at the like higher education level.
Totally.
If we've seen the increased costs of higher education go through the roof, but the product they're buying is not exponentially better than what the product was, decades ago. It's still pretty simple, but the cost has gone through the roof. And I don't know if people are going to continue to invest in that if the other side of it, they can't get a job to A, pay back the loans, and B, better themselves financially, which is arguably the whole point of higher education. When we think about these roles, I was reading a post yesterday, and it said, it was from Glenn Cathy, forget how you pronounce his last name. Great dude. Glenn says, at a high level, IT will handle technical infrastructure. HR will oversee collaboration, productivity, fairness, and workforce planning, and business leadership will align AI's contributions with strategic goals. So we're talking about like, how will we work with AI? But when I actually thought about like what Glenn's saying is, he's talking about HR overseeing collaboration, productivity, fairness, and workforce planning. That sounds like what HR is doing now. That sounds like the boring stuff now. So when we have this emerging generation of like Gen Z and Gen Alpha really quickly, like, why would HR tell them how to collaborate? Or like ensuring fairness sounds a lot like compliance. Workforce planning. I think a lot of HR folks way over index on this like skill of workforce planning or org design to kind of like build this false moat of why they get paid by a company. So I think we need to think way bigger about the implications of business. And it's back to the piece you said that recruiting is transactional. It's actually just an operational element of the business. It doesn't have to be tied to an individual as we know it to the job description. You're a recruiter if you're working a rec and need to hire somebody. And sometimes you don't even have a rec. So I know there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, no, there is. I suppose two things to say about it, kind of almost in reverse order. So that kind of HR thing that you talked about, I think HR as a whole, and I'll include talent acquisition in this, has kind of just been trying to find its purpose for a very long time. For a very long time now. It wants to be strategic. It can't quite manage it. And in the meantime, we've seen, the role of the CFO or the role of the CMO become, these business critical, big strategic roles. And a lot of that has been driven by the way that they are able to align their data with the organization's goals. So I think that's something to kind of reflect on if we're getting a lot more effective data from using AI about people. But I think that actually it's like, what is HR's kind of purpose? Maybe HR's purpose is to kind of manage that intersection between AI and humans, to kind of work out what that is and how that works. Maybe that's it. I don't, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's I also think that the silos within companies, talent management, talent acquisition, L&D, those silos are kind of blowing up. There's no reason to keep them separate if we're sort of talking about talent in the way that we're talking about. So yeah, I think it's that's kind of an interesting one. The kind of the generations coming into the workforce and the education system and things like that. Again, we're just saving ourselves up a huge amounts of issues here. So I have I have a Generation Alpha son, basically. So and he's kind of he's in school at the moment, and a lot of the stuff that they learn in school hasn't changed since I was his age and in school, and that's kind of worrying. But actually looking at how they, this whole thing about these kids have no social skills, they have, and it's so not true. The way that they learn things from short form video, the way that they communicate with each other online and plan their kind of offline lives through, some of the most interesting kind of, channels and ways of doing things is kind of fascinating to watch. So I think that's kind of one thing. And I think in universities at the moment, there is this kind of existential crisis. I was reading an article last week. It was about some British universities that are kind of at war with their students over AI and cheating. And the article kind of had someone who had gone through a whole term and got like top marks and just used AI all the way, and they just I feel like a bit of a fraud. And then someone else who hadn't used AI at all, who'd been accused of cheating and using it. So it was kind of crazy. And I thought, well, actually, these people are going into, to your point, these people are going into a workforce where they have to interface with these tools all the time. So we need to work out how that works, and how do you use AI to sort of support you and help you with projects, projects like that. And rather than saying you can't use it, it's kind of like teaching people how to use it to kind of make things better. So again, that's the kind of conversation we should be having, not people are cheating, we need to stop them. It's like, no, you need to fundamentally change the way that you teach, which is kind of a much bigger topic than stopping people cheating. And I think that unfortunately is a problem.
That's one of my screening questions right now. I'm asking a lot of candidates in the requisitions I'm working, just like, how are you using LLMs and AI or ChatGPT? And depending on the level, depending on the role, sometimes people's faces drop. They kind of think I'm teeing up like a gotcha question. So I've actually reframed it where it's like, hey, we leverage a lot of tools. Tell me about like a project you're working on, and give them that comfortability around how they communicate, because you hit the nail on the head. People don't actually know how to talk about it, if it's like good or evil, when they're allowed to use it, when not. It's just a weird moment.
And also it becomes like a secret thing. It's like, oh, I found a way to do this using a large language. I'm not going to tell anyone, because A, it feels like cheating. Or B, I want to keep that advantage to myself. And that's just crazy. It's just crazy. And it's because of that that kind of clandestine feeling that somehow I'm doing my work 10 times quicker. I must be cheating.
And that's the knowledge race. Yeah. That's because like we saw that crazy moment in time where there were more recruiter roles posted on LinkedIn than software engineers. That was like Q2 2021. And now we have all these like maybe tens of thousands of recruiters that have been displaced, and a lot of recruiters out of work that I have so much empathy for. So it's only human nature to grasp on to something that aligns with our financial security, which it can be that asymmetric information that allows us to be better at our jobs. And one thing I've learned from recruiters that are 10, 20 years ahead of me is they are willing to give away this stuff for free. Those are the good ones. And they're the ones that are willing to mentor me and make fast friendships. That's something that I've seen just in this last year of my own exploration around content and community building. And I'm immensely grateful, and I can't wait to pay it forward. And that's something that I focus my time on. Do you have any advice for recruiters who are also looking to advance their career and be better at their job, but also be a part of the community and be a steward of relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a collective journey that we're on, and I think that one of the things sometimes about recruiting is that particularly in agency recruiting and things like that, it's seen as like a massive competition to outdo someone and all that kind of stuff. But actually, over the course of a career, it's a very collaborative thing. We've had lots of things that have come into recruiting in the last sort of 20 or 30 years that have changed the game to a certain extent. And I think it's kind of really important to kind of share knowledge and do all those things. And, I go to lots of events where people are doing just that. And it's just fantastic to see because, we're kind of making this up as we go along. And I think doing it collectively is kind of much more important. And I think that for people in terms of sort of developing their career, it's kind of about trying to be as open-minded as possible. One of the things that was a real kind of guide for me when I started my kind of career in the internet, I used to work in recruitment marketing. When the internet first came along, and it was almost like things are changing so quickly. I'm very clear about what I believe today, but I'm also very clear that tomorrow I might completely change my mind, and that's fine. And it's kind of, I think sometimes that sort of flexibility of thinking is really difficult to do. You can be very passionate about something one day, and then the next day something changes and it's just not true anymore. And I think it's just accepting that and going, okay, that's fascinating. What's true now is much better than, I can't possibly change my mind because I've already kind of put my flag in the ground around this. So I think that kind of flexibility of thinking is really important. And also learning from sources outside of our industry, I think is really important. So, go to the source, go to, the millions of AI newsletters that people are writing just about AI, not about, its use in recruiting, and look at how other disciplines are using it. How are marketing using some of these tools? How are finance using some of these tools? Because I think that gives you, much more of a context to kind of learn, to try and work out what's happening next, to introduce new ideas. So it's just kind of being that kind of open-mindedness and that flexibility of everything you knew one day is not true the next day, is an important part of it.
I really appreciate that. And it made me think of the best Python developer I know. And he is a researcher with patents, exited founder. He lives in a conversion van and rides mountain bikes, and he'll log on, code a few hours a day. And that's something that I think about a lot of the time is like, I don't need to be heads down consuming all of this information. You can even look at the mass exodus from OpenAI from an engineering perspective to just help see around a corner and measure our thinking around AI. If you're only getting your information about AI from an HR tech vendor, you probably need to balance your media diet. So I think that's great advice to be adaptable and flexible. When you talk about your learnings and your experience and being around this space, it made me think of problems that I've solved in recruiting. And I go back years, and one of the problems I solved was for a company, mobile applications and implementing digital transformation through our technology so that we could compete with our direct competitors from a recruitment marketing perspective that just had a better experience for their candidates. So I agree, it's going to be candidate behavior that drives bottoms up change. Yeah. And having done it before, like, I'm less concerned about our ability to adapt moving forward to solve these problems. They're just going to be at a little bit more of a grandiose scale when it comes to AI and robots.
And they're just coming at us quicker. I think that's the whole thing. It's kind of like, we've adapted before, we've done different things, but it's just the time scale is so much shorter. So there isn't the time to sit there and go, I wonder what, let's watch other people make mistakes and we'll kind of do, and then it's just moved on. So it's the speed of change, which is the challenge here. Not that people aren't able to make changes, but just the speed at which it's going is extraordinary, and it's not going to slow down. It might kind of plateau a little bit. I'm not sure, but it's not going to slow down. And I think that's the thing that people have to get used to.
It's also a measure for me to remind myself that we're in this little echo chamber of high tech. There are 10 other sectors in the S&P. There is a massive quantity of the workforce in non-desk work. And one example based on this conversation that comes to mind is like what we saw with the hiring surge between delivery drivers, like UPS versus FedEx here in the US. And they're both leveraging AI ATS systems to get temporary workers hired. So I think that's a great use case that we could use as we move forward for how technology interacts with the physical real world jobs that make our society function.
No, absolutely. I think that is the, those sectors, they're the canary in the coal mine. They've already, those big companies, they've already shifted towards this. I was literally doing an interview with a fast food chain just before I did this one, talking just about that, how cut their, they've cut their hiring time down from 13 days to 3 days.
Wow.
Massively improved their candidate experience, improved their hiring manager experience, are able to get offers out the door quickly to people before they go to their competition. All through using conversational AI and some other automation tools. So it's, I think that people need to look at that sector and what's going on, because it's kind of already there in lots of ways.
One of my takes is that I think we're going to see more CHROs and chief people officers coming from a recruiting track. One of the observations I've seen is HR keeps talking about like earning a seat at the table with those other C-suite members that you described earlier in the conversation. But I also see a lot of HR folks talking about burnout. Recruiters that I know and recruiting leaders, they're not talking about being burned out. They're hustlers. They're not talking about earning a seat at the table. Like the CRO didn't earn a seat at the table. They went out and took it. So I think what we're going to see is this new wave of leaders that just operate differently than traditional HR folks.
I think that there is just an opportunity. There's an opportunity. I was in another discussion yesterday where someone said, what if, how can HR step up to this opportunity? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter who takes the opportunity is there. So, whether that's kind of, there are certain kind of roles within the business where people are more suited to do that, or whether it's the kind of entrepreneurial vision of individuals, the opportunity to, to kind of really step up and elevate this kind of thing is just vast. So that's why I think it's a really exciting time. And it's like, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that organizations, if it's not happening already, are going to go through so much change in the next sort of 2 or 3 years around everything. And change can be disruptive and painful, and people can come off badly from it, but it also creates opportunity. And I think it's like looking for those opportunities is the best advice I could give anyone right now, because I think there will just be a huge amount of opportunity over the next couple of years that comes with the disruption.
100%. My advice for recruiters is like build a pie or a comb-shaped skill set, get good at something else, spend time developing another skill so that you can future-proof yourself a little bit, or at least potentially get opportunities that you may not even see for yourself. That's kind of been my experience too. This has been a really interesting conversation. One of the things I wanted to go back to and tee up directly is, why is recruiting slow to change?
Absolutely. Yes, I did say I'd do that. I cover that. So in all the years I've kind of worked in recruitment, I've seen the arrival of the internet, the arrival of cloud computing, the arrival of social media, the arrival of mobile, the arrival of, big data, machine learning, and now AI, generative AI. So, there's a bit of a cycle here in terms of seeing what happens. Ultimately, I think it's actually got nothing to do with the people who work in recruiting. I think that, LinkedIn is full of people taking a pop at talent acquisition, heads of talent acquisition and recruiters. It's just that it's actually got nothing to do with that. It's all about the social and cultural norms of recruiting and hiring. So everyone who works has been recruited or hired at some point. So everyone has kind of been through, it's almost a universal experience. Oh, I guess my camera. It's almost a universal experience in the workplace. And there's always been a certain way of doing it. So if you start kind of wanting to change that. It's like, oh, we're going to have video interviews now, or we're going to send the candidates the interview questions in advance because we think it will make the interviews more inclusive and better. Or we don't need resumes or CVs anymore. The pushback from that, from hiring managers, from society as a whole, because you are changing something that's so fundamental to the way that people have experienced work. And that's why it's difficult to change. And that's why it needs things like pandemic or, candidates suddenly using this AI and saying, this is perhaps a better way of doing it. Things kind of need to break before they change. And really, I'm really sort of starting to believe that more and more. But you can change cultural norms because they change all the time. And I think that what's different about this period of time we're in now compared to when the internet came along, when mobile phones came along, when cloud computing came along, when social media came along, is there the opportunity to change those norms about how recruiting works, and rethink it and do it very differently. So that's why I think this is different this time, because of all those other kind of inventions, if you like. You could just take the way that things worked in the past and sort of superimpose them on the new way of doing things. And I just don't think you can do that now.
Matt, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on. Where will you be this year? Do you have an events calendar? Where are you going to be spending your time?
Yeah, I'm kind of working on that. I'm working on that at the moment. So I will be doing podcasts everywhere, as I always do. I'm going to be Transform in a couple of months. I'm going to be at HR Tech towards the end of the year, Recfest, various other places. So yeah, I'm going to be out and about as much as I possibly can. But there's always 2 episodes of my podcast a week, so you can always listen to me whenever you want, basically.
And you've got some books and courses as well, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I've been doing kind of a lot of work around helping people have this kind of strategic foresight for the future. What does that look like? How do we sort of understand what's going on now? How do we create a vision of the future? So I've been working with a few employers around that. I have an online course around that. And I'm hoping that there's going to be a sort of a third book at some point this year, just sort of working out the details around that at the moment.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to check it out. I'll see you out there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.